In this video, I got a huge key unboxing to show off to you guys, and then I'm going to talk about this idea of books being done. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle. And in this video, I got a huge key unboxing to show to you guys, and then I'm going to talk about this idea of books being done. Now, there's a really interesting kind of sentiment in the comic book community that often labels certain books as being done. You know, these can be things like Amazing Spider-Man 369, first appearance of Carnage. These can be things like Avengers 196, first appearance of Taskmaster. Often they are books that, have seen sort of their pop culture significance, in some kind of movie in some kind of way. Maybe that character was killed off, and now there's sort of a sentiment surrounding that book of that character being done. And I think that that's something that's really interesting to talk about, and I'm going to kind of dive into that idea with you guys here today after I unbox this key, which will definitely set up that discussion. But before I get into the book, if you guys could drop me a like or a comment or subscribe if you're enjoying the content, help support the channel, do one of those things, I would appreciate it. But let us do the fun stuff now. So this is a really, really cool book. I'm so excited to have this in my collection. A little bit of a backstory, how I came across this one. I was on Instagram, and there is a Travis Comics, kind of one of the Spine Ticks regulars, was on there listing a few books, and he had listed this key up for sale. And when he put his book up and he showed the price, I could not claim fast enough, because this was a book that I have wanted for a while, and there's been times in the past where I've seen it sold at decent prices, and when I saw Travis post this one, I was absolutely blown away. I could not say no to this book right here. All right, let me got to get all the paper tape, very, very securely packaged. Travis, I appreciate that. What the hell? Oh, okay, there it is. Oh, another little thing. Sorry for the light content release this week, ladies and gentlemen. I've been super crazy busy with a huge project that I'm working on, and it's going really well. But, it's been preventing me from being able to make comic book videos. But don't worry, because next week I will open things up, going into the holiday break. Got a lot of cool stuff on the horizon here. I got a lot of good ideas I want to do for the comic book stuff. So we're going to be back in our regularly scheduled program. All right, I finally got it out. Okay, without further ado, the book that I picked up here, which is going to set up our conversation, is, you guessed it, Iron Man number 55, first appearance of the Mad Titan himself, Thanos. Also first appearance of Drax, who of course is right there on the cover. First appearance of the Blood Brothers as well. And like some would maybe argue, first appearance of Eros, which I happen to believe it to be a first cameo appearance of Eros. I think the first true appearance of Eros, or Star Fox, or whatever you want to call him, is Captain Marvel number 27. But this book right here, we all know why this is a major key. We all know why people want to own this thing. It's because it is the first appearance of Thanos. And when Travis had posted this on his Instagram, like I said, I couldn't claim it fast enough. He actually had listed this thing for $250. So, to me, that was a really great price for a book like this. It's about, like a mid-ish grade, probably a 4 or 5, maybe it's a 5 if it can get cleaned up and everything like that. But for that price, to me, this was absolutely worth it. But now that I've shown off the book, I think we now have to transition to kind of like the bigger topic of conversation, which is sort of the elephant in the room that I wanted to talk about, which is this idea of books being done. Now, if we take a character like Thanos here, right? Thanos has had his moment in pop culture. Obviously, he was the main villain of the MCU. So in theory, we're not going to see that character come back into the MCU in any kind of way. We're not going to see this book, flying off the shelves, because in theory, that character has sort of run its course. But, one of the things I think is really interesting, and I feel like, you guys probably understand this as well, as you're starting to, watch all of these Disney series, and we're starting to get characters like, the Abomination making a return. We're starting to see things like Michael B. Jordan reprising Killmonger in the What If show. And I think one of the things that we have to understand is, like in comic books, what we're starting to see in the films and the movies is that, no character is really truly dead in the MCU. Ipso facto, no book that relates to that character or a key issue or whatever you may want to call it is actually done as it relates to the comic book market. Now, I will caveat this idea a little bit. I do think that there are some keys, so to speak, that maybe have a tangential relationship to that of a particular show that, you could maybe argue as being done. But what I'm trying to say here is the books that I believe are, blue chip keys, like first appearances of big characters, etc. Those books I think are always going to have a role to play later on in the future. And I kind of wanted to just kind of dig into some of the books with you guys and talk about some of these things that, sort of come to mind with me. We'll kind of look at the market report together, including this Iron Man 55 right here. And then there's, one book at the end that I kind of want to point out that I think is really interesting to talk about as a book being done. So of course, this one really interesting. Iron Man 55 had its heyday, around the end game time. And so let me just pull up like an 8.5. I'm trying to look for grades that have a lot of volume of sales. So, here we can see this book definitely was at a peak around 2018 when we had Infinity War. You can see right here, average prices, $1,138, etc. And then this is where, it started to plummet down in sales. Here we go. So Endgame had this book at $1,000, so a little bit down, but overall it was still kind of holding its value. And then this is where the book would quote unquote be done, right? Once we get Endgame, after that, this book sort of plummeted. And you can see this downward trend right here, all the way down to $700 at an 8.5 grade in the beginning of 2020, and then slowly started to see its rise. We get to 2021, it picks back up above its previous all-time high because we're in the 2021 era. Maybe there's a little bit of a dip, in the market correction, and then we get the news of Eternals and Star Fox, and then this book, sort of has new relevancy, and now it's at its all-time high. Now, this book is a little bit interesting because of the fact that we have that little supplemental detail that this is the cameo of Arrow, so it did take that little bit of a bump. But if you look at the big picture, I think that it's a pretty strong sign that even though we got the height of that character's popularity in a movie like Endgame, the book has been able to bounce back in this last year or so to reach new heights, even outside of the fact that it was connected to that film. But if I'm really taking a step back and looking at the landscape of what we see going on in the MCU, you're going to have a hard time convincing me that Josh Brolin is never going to return as Thanos. And even though they dusted him in the actual movie, I really do think that when Marvel is ready and when they want to bring him back into the silver screen, Josh Brolin is 100% going to sign up to do another movie. I mean, he wants that sweet Disney paycheck, and Thanos is such a great character. There's just many more stories that they're going to be able to tell with him. So I really think a book like this is not really ever going to be done. Similarly, I think there's another character that I think is interesting with regards to being done in the MCU, and that of course is the Mandarin, who, as we know, made their first appearance in Tales of Suspense number 50. Now, this is a really interesting book with regards to, analyzing some of the prices of a book being done, so to speak. Now, we had the Mandarin all the way back when in Iron Man number 3 had a little bit of a bump in terms of like what the market was doing back then. Then we got the Mandarin in Shang-Chi, and then spoilers ahead, if you guys haven't seen it, you may want to fast forward like 20 seconds from this point right here. But the Mandarin actually dies at the end of Shang-Chi. And if we look at some of the prices for this book, we can see that there has been like a pretty strong correction overall. Now, one thing to point out though is that there's not that many sales to really look at. So it's hard to like evaluate what the actual fair market value of a book like this is. And if we just look at the 2021 numbers, we'll just take a look right here. Anticipation of the movie has this book around 225. It goes up to 286. Then in the middle of summer, it has a massive spike to 750, then drops back down to 350, then down to 350, and now in November back down to 256. If we look over here at the 4.0 grade, we can see a similar trend where it's kind of spiked back up with the craziness of the market, had its height at the top of Shang-Chi, and is now kind of descending down into a dip right here. And when we look at these graphs, that makes a lot of sense as to why you would call a book like this done. It definitely feels like, this thing is no longer desired in the market or is going to have its massive correction. If I go onto eBay, I can find like a decent amount of buy it now is at the low grade. So it makes sense to say that a book like this, is done. But while I can't provide examples as to why a book like TOS 50 might have new heights at some point in the future, I can point to two other examples that could give a book like the Mandarin's first appearance a lot of hope. This one is Fantastic Four number 94. And I had talked about this book when I made a video some weeks back talking about, buying the dip, which for the most part, I'm actually expressing similar thoughts and ideas where I don't really feel like books are done. In fact, I think the times that, books are quote unquote done is the best time to pick them up. But this is a book right here I think is really interesting. And just to quickly show you at the 6.5 grade, we can see it at the height of WandaVision. This thing was hovering around the $300 range in, at a 6.5 grade. takes its massive dip once Agatha gets put on ice. We get the news of Agatha coming back, and now this thing is back up to what the prices were earlier in the year. And this graph to me is just a very, telling version of the story of this book, where once you get sort of that news and that excitement that the character is coming back, that also brings the book back as well. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, Swagglehawk, that doesn't really count. I mean, nobody could have predicted that Agatha Harkness was going to get her own show. Well, what I would say to that is, nobody can predict anything with what the MCU is going to do. I mean, maybe they're going to give the Mandarin his own show. Maybe they're going to give Thanos a prequel movie with him and Harry Styles to like explore the mythos of the Celestials. So, I think all of these things are on the table with the MCU, which is why I really do believe that, books are never really done. Now, the last little example I kind of want to get into, because I've been indexing a lot on, MCU and how the movies kind of move the books. But there is one book that I think is interesting to evaluate as a book that did continue to increase in value even after the character was done, so to speak, in pop culture. And that book is actually X Factor #6, First Appearance of Apocalypse. Now, I definitely believe that we're going to see Apocalypse in the MCU at some point in time, at some point in the future. I definitely believe that, but let's table that speculation for a little bit for a time. Let's kind of put that to the side. One thing that I think is interesting about this book is that, Apocalypse had a major role to play in Jonathan Hickman's current comic book storyline, when he was doing Dawn of X and X of Swords and things like that. And Hickman utilizing Apocalypse in that way is actually reflected in the number and sales of this book. Here is the X Factor #6. We're at the 9.8 grade. And then when we look at, 2016 to where this book was being sold, like say around the time when the X-Men movie had Apocalypse in it, if we just go to a snapshot, 2016 numbers right here, we can see that, the volume of sales, 138. So the highest volume of sales was going on for this book in that year. And you can see the high for that thing was $405. So a lot of excitement for this book. Everyone was excited for the X-Men movie. And then the X-Men movie was what it was, and it was terrible, and nobody liked Apocalypse. So we flash forward to 2017, the year after this thing, and we can see that the book is done, so to speak, right? We can see the highs for it in 2017 are 276, and the volume of sales is now down to 79. But here's where it gets really interesting to me, is that, outside of movie spec, MCU spec, things like that, if we move to 2019 here, which is when Hickman announced that he was doing all these X storylines and utilizing Apocalypse, what do we see here? We see a big spike in sales. 97 were moved this year and a high of 625. So outside of speculation for movie spec and people wanting to get their hands on this thing for the fact that, Apocalypse may show up in the MCU one day, what we're seeing here is actually a new record high in comparison to where it was, when it was out in the movies in 2016, simply due to the fact that Apocalypse was being utilized in a comic book storyline. And that's sort of another interesting point that I wanted to emphasize with you guys, is that, just because a character is done in a movie doesn't mean that character is going to be out of sight of the, pop culture space. Like I think about another character like, Carnage, Amazing Spider-Man 361, a book like that. Just because that character is dead in Sony, although I don't think he's dead, I think he's going to come back, doesn't mean that Carnage is not going to be utilized in other properties like video games or comic books, etc. And doesn't mean that that book won't necessarily shoot up again because of the hype of that property. And as we see there from X Factor #6, that is actually something that happened with Apocalypse. But let me know what you guys think about characters being done or books being done. I personally think that no character is ever really done. I do think that there are times, in the market where things take dips and, books, definitely fall off the cliff and then maybe they'll come back eventually. But for me, I actually think that, a blue chip key is a blue chip key. And over the long term, that thing is always going to increase in value, which is why I decided to pick up this book right here, Invincible Iron Man #55, First Appearance of Thanos, first cameo of Eros, first appearance of Drax. I'm sure that when Guardians of the Galaxy 3 rolls around and we have Drax in some trailers, this book will also take another spike. But anyways, I'm really, really happy I have it. And anyways, that is all I have for this video. Drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content, and I will see you in the next one.